Okay, guys, so I'm going to keep reading The Great Chicago Fire. So, picking up where we left off, we're kind of in the middle of chapter 6, which was entitled Everything Went Wrong. The fire started spreading north along one street and east along another at the same time. It was much too big for two small fire trucks to fight. The men had to get very near the fire in order to reach it with their hoses. By now, it was hot enough to burn anyone standing that close. They did their best. They stayed near the fire as long as they could stand it. Then they moved back to recover until they could go back and fight some more. Some of them tried to use doors from the burned buildings to shield themselves from the heat, but the air was so hot that the doors burst into flames. This is a picture. Finally, the chief fire marshal arrived with the modern steam engines. He ordered his men to surround the fire. However, there weren't enough of them, so he sent someone to call in a second alarm asking for more engines. The firemen ran to the fire alarm box at Gull's drugstore, the same place as before. This time, an alarm was sent, but he made a mistake. He used the wrong code. At the courthouse, they thought the fireman was just telling them where the fire was, not asking for more help. It looked as if there was no way to stop the fire from destroying the next 15 or 16 blocks. Then it would reach the 4 blocks that had already burned the day before. Beyond that was the river. That was the good news. This large empty space with nothing left to burn should stop the fire. If not, the river itself would, or so people thought. Chapter 7, Across the River. Chicago was proud of its new firefighting equipment, but it had seen hard use during the fire the night before. It was worn out, and some of it needed work. The firefighters had been too tired to fix it after the fire. Now some of it was starting to break down. Hoses burst open. A few of them actually started to burn. Some steam engines stopped working. At this time, the wind was blowing harder and harder, and the heat from the fire created its own wind that swirled as fast as a tornado. A spark flew all the way up to the steeple of St. Paul's Church. This was one of the highest points in the west side. From so high up, the fire could be blown almost anywhere. Right near the church were several lumber yards full of wood and sawdust. What do we know about wood and sawdust? It catches fire pretty easily, right? And a factory that made matches. Oh boy. These all blazed up at once. Burning pieces of wood sailed high into the sky. People across the river in the heat in the heart of the city thought they were safe. Many of them went out to watch the fire as though it were an exciting play. One man called it such a view, this is in quotations, such a magnificent sight. But they were wrong. They were not safe. Cinders from the church steeple flew all the way to the south side and set it alight. We know that means on fire, right? We talked about that word. The fire had crossed the river. Soon flames were spreading through the south side faster than a man could run. People suddenly realized they only had a few minutes to escape. One woman was giving birth. She and her baby were carried out on a stretcher minutes after he was born. People grabbed a few things that they valued most and ran. A 13-year-old girl put all her best clothing, one piece over another. A 6-year-old ran back into her house at the last minute to grab a beloved doll. Some people were practical. They took food, clothes, and bedding. Others took items they couldn't bear to lose: the family Bible, paintings of relatives, a dead child's toys. In the confusion of the moment, many people didn't know what to rescue. One woman ran into the street with her frying pan and muffin tins. Others carried things like feather duster or armload of umbrellas. Yeah, they were like panicked, right? It's a lady with her baby in the stretcher, and see that guy with a piece of artwork. Many people wanted to save their pets. One little girl carried a box with 4 puppies. A boy led his pet goat on a leash. One woman clutched a huge bird cage. Out of habit, people carefully locked their doors before they left their doomed houses and put their keys in their pockets. Some families brought their furniture and belongings down the street. The lucky ones had their own carts. The rest had to hire one. Carts suddenly became very expensive. Drivers asked as much as 10 times as their usual price. They had to be paid in cash right then and there, or they would have to go find someone else. And if they were offered more money, they might dump one family's load and replace it with another's. Oh, that's pretty bad. More generous drivers carried whole families and their goods for free. Some of them went back into the fire to rescue more people. Men ran to their offices to get important books and papers. Many rescued cash, shares of stock, and records belonging to their clients. After the fire, some families were saved from ruin because a clerk had risked his life to save papers they would need. In order to help, some people kept working until the last possible moment. The telegraph operator stayed so long he had to stop sending his final message in the middle of a sentence. So, telegraph was before the telephone, and it was a way to communicate over like wires, like the telephone. But instead of hearing a voice, you heard like taps, and like you might think Morse code, right? So telegraph. So they had certain taps that meant certain letters, and they would send messages that way. Um, Workers at the post office raced to load all the mail on wagons and send it to safety. Volunteers at the railroad depot pushed more than 100 loaded freight cars down the tracks and out of danger by hand. Newspapermen at the Chicago Times office tried to publish one final edition. The last article they wrote said the entire business portion of the city is burned up and the Times building is doomed. Then they ran. The Windy City. Strong wind was one of the main reasons the Chicago fire spread so fast, and the most popular nickname for Chicago is, in quotation marks, the Windy City. But the nickname probably refers to another kind of wind. The rest of the country thought politicians in Chicago bragged about their city too much. In the 19th century, wind was a slang term for empty boasts. That means like empty promises. People called Chicago the Windy City to make fun of it because they were saying there were like politicians who made empty promises. So, like a lot of, wind, which is kind of like an empty promise. It's a figurative language again. In 1892, a newspaper reporter wrote that once people saw Chicago, they stopped joking. They discovered that everything Chicago bragged about was really true. And that's where we're going to stop. We're on chapter 8, The Escape now. Escape. All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you were coloring while I was reading, and that you're being productive and enjoying your day. Okay. All right. So if you have a few minutes left before lunch, you can quietly read. Okay. And put your things away. Thank you.